Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, and welcome to this episode of the Life with a Why interview series podcast. This is the interview series where we find out why people do what they do, and this is the third part of a three-part deep dive into the life of Gabrielle Blackwell. Today's conversation centers around the theme of spirituality and religion, lack thereof, and how that can have an impact on your life and other people's lives. What we'll learn today is Gabrielle has had a sense of religion and spirituality about her from a very young age, but that has changed. The definition of that has changed as she's gone on in her life. Her very first description of herself in episode 1 was a quote-unquote hippie witch. Today I ask her about that, what that means, and what impact her spirituality has had on her life. Not only that, but later on in the episode, towards the end, I ask her a question that I asked her in episode 1. And what's really important is that she gives a different answer this time. And I think that that's really interesting. So, with that being said, welcome to the podcast, welcome to the episode, and let's crack into the very last conversation we have with Gabrielle Blackwell. Gabrielle Blackwell, welcome back to level 3. Gabrielle Blackwell, welcome back to the third one. Welcome back to, level 3. Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm all good. It's been a little while since we were chatting. We've a lot to get through today. There have been things that have been happening, particularly what happened after we talked on Monday, that I'd love to dive into. But overall, things are going well on your end?
Overall, they're going very well, thank you. Good. Yeah, what about you?
Oh yeah, all good. Living the life. I move to London tomorrow, so then life just blows up tomorrow. But that's okay. Yes. My mind gets blown, and so does my bank account. But such is the cost of immigrating. Right. Well, again. Disclaimer, anybody who is listening to this episode and has not listened to episodes number 1 and 2 of Gabrielle, you need to stop here and you need to go back. We've talked about quite a few things today. It's very much a continuation conversation, and if you don't have the context, whilst I'm sure that the wisdom and the insights are going to be just as useful, the context is slightly more useful. But today we're going to chat about your life with a Y, but based on your current life. Last week, we talked about why you did what you did before your quote-unquote breakdown. What drove you to that, why you were in this sort of cycle. In episode 1, we talked about the actual breakdown itself. And today, I'd love to chat about why you do what you do now, because there seems to be a very clear divide. So in order to provide context for that, what's your life been like since the breakdown? What's your life been like since you turned 27?
Ooh, what has my life been like? Honestly, overall, it's been on an upward swing. I know, like, right after the breakdown, there was the experience of, like, who am I really? What do I really care about? What am I interested in? So it was very much like starting off with a blank canvas, and I took a year off of work, about a year and a half. I didn't work, and I moved out to New York City. I lived a whole eat, pray, love experience where my soul, I think, purpose, the thing that was guiding me was, I need to learn more about myself. I need to learn about, how do I cope? How do I feel? I need to embrace my emotions. I can't just stifle them down. And so I think more than anything else, I was just gaining awareness of myself. So since then, I'm honestly just better able to navigate whatever situations come my way. Prior to the breakdown, I think if there was an experience that I was having that was rather negative or pretty adverse, I might internalize that, right? Going back to that belief set of, oh, I am bad, I am not good enough, right? There's something that's wrong with me inherently, versus it being, all right, I have awareness of what that belief set drove me to do and the kinds of places that it kept me in. And now I have the awareness to go, I know if I keep this belief set, I'll just keep on reliving this life over and over again. And so I choose something different. So I think having, honestly, like what it's been like is having the opportunity to always have a choice no matter what. So even if something is terrible, absolutely horrendous, I can take a moment and go, this is not great. I don't want to experience things that are not great. I choose to go to things that are great. So what's required of me in this next step in my path to greatness? So like I don't know like how we describe that situation other than like empowered, but I feel very, very much empowered in whatever I do versus feeling powerless.
So you're more empowered now because you said that you needed to learn more about yourself. So what
Hmm.
did you not know about yourself? What questions were you not asking yourself before now? What were you not tuned into? What was not important enough to think about? That's really important now.
Yeah, so I grew up in an environment. So okay, so like I African American woman growing up with a single black mom, and if you have any black listeners, people with black moms or black families, I feel like could probably attest to there might not always be a lot of room and space for emotions, right? I would imagine it's not just like black families, by the way, right? But like there's not always a lot of room for emotions. There's not always a lot of room for choices. It's like you just do as you're told to do, the end. And then whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger. No pain, no gain. So the way that I would have internalized that as a kid would be, all right, even if I'm in pain, I can't hold that. I can never say I'm hurting, I'm sad. I can't ever hold space for my emotions. And so then I just push them down. I never actually deal with them. That doesn't mean they go away. It just means that like over the course of time, I can only hold in so much before I reach a boiling point. I think that's really what the breakdown was there was this moment where I'm like, all right, I've reached full capacity of what I can keep down, and then everything spilled out. The benefit of that breakdown was I got to see everything at 27 years old. I got to see everything. I could make sense, even though I was in a totally different state. I could make sense out of, oh, it makes a lot of sense why I am the like not just why I am the way that I am, but like why I seem to have the experiences that I have. Why I had an eating disorder for 10 years. Like it made a lot of sense why I had an eating disorder all of a sudden when prior to this breakdown, I was like, what's wrong with me? So it wasn't a matter of what's wrong with me. It was more so, wow, there were all these experiences that happened, and I was just really deeply sad. And I couldn't accept that sadness. And I tried to convince myself or allowed people to convince me that I shouldn't be sad when I had every single right to do that and to feel that. And so, so now it was funny. My mom and I, we kind of got into an argument over the weekend because I'm kind of dealing with a somewhat stressful situation. And my mom was like, just be positive, just be positive. And I was like, no, right? I was like, no, I was like, this is a sucky situation. And I have feelings about it. And I am not going to deny my feelings. And just because it sucks right now doesn't mean that it's always going to suck. So, like, let me just tune into what I'm feeling right now. So like that's like one thing, which is like me being curious about my emotions. Like, how am I feeling? I would not ask myself that question. I think there's another piece to this. The next piece is when I'm in a certain emotion, the next question I'll ask myself is, where am I? Am I feeling, is this a trigger from the past? Is this something that's triggering like a past emotion? And like, can I go back to that place with the wisdom and the awareness that I have now and go, all right, if I can help myself heal from the past, like some inner child work, right, then I will help myself heal in this moment as well. So I think those are probably the main two questions I wasn't asking myself in the past, which is how am I feeling and where am I?
Out of interest, were your negative emotions perceived as negative things?
Yeah, I there's the negative emotions. There's me being a dork. I'm like these lower frequency emotions, right? These lower vibration.
Okay.
I'm like, so there's so and there's I'll send you an image, because when I talk about this like lower vibration emotions, there's these ones that they just they don't vibrate at a high frequency. They're dense,
Okay.
heavy, like shame, for
Okay. Yeah.
example,
So,
is super dense. While on the very high side is where you kind of have like the joy and gratitude and that state of abundance, right? Where you feel super connected to everything versus feeling like dark and sunken down. But yeah, I think there is oh, you're not happy. There's something wrong with you. 100%.
um, is it still that way? For
Oh,
you internally. This is not an
oh,
external.
for me, no. No,
Okay.
for
Good.
me, no. So there's a, yeah, so like for me, no.
So,
I'm curious, right? I'm like, okay, how am I feeling? Might be like, when I say like, where am I? I'm just like, I'm like, am I like scattered? Am I somewhere else? Am I not accepting this feeling right now? Am I trying to run away from it? Or am I really, really present? And I had this one therapist, and she would ask me the question, like if I had this emotion. It was really the first time that I did true emotional work. There was an emotion, like she would ask me questions of, okay, like, like we would do a breathing exercise, and then and we would talk about something that happened in my past. And she's like, all right, now I want you to locate where this memory lives in your body. So I'd do my breathing exercise. So maybe it lived on my chest. Maybe it lived like where my spleen is, that kind of thing. She's like, now I want you to like breathe into it. Now, what kind of sound does it make? Okay, so I did this in my year off, where I was getting really curious about my emotions, and it wasn't a matter of like I want to make like logical sense out of them, but I wanted to build a relationship with my emotions. It's very much like if I can understand the intricacies and the nuances and the subtleties and the needs and the desires of my emotions, then I could better interact with them and they could better interact with me, and we could live harmoniously, right? So I would actually like I would write down an emotion, for example, like, and it wasn't necessarily an emotion, but if someone were to say, hey, like, how are you, Gabrielle? And I would say, oh, I'm fine. I'm like, well, I'm like, so first, if someone goes, I'm fine, I'm like, who is fine, right? Like, what does that mean? Like, what is the life of someone, so just imagine fine as a person. And so I would create these stories of like based off of how I'd answer these questions and how I was feeling. And there's times where there's certain emotions or certain states, like being vulnerable, that was scary. So I'm like, you're right. I would create a character that was vulnerable, right? I'm like, oh, vulnerable is that woman at the party who kind of is like a little bit of the wallflower. She's looking at everybody. You kind of want to approach her, but you kind of don't. You don't know. Like, is she like? Can you be friends? Can you not? Is she a bitch? I don't know, right? So I would create these characters to make my emotions that much more approachable for myself. And so I'm like, all right, if I can help myself kind of build a relationship up in that way, if I can essentially create some intimacy with my own emotions, then I can understand myself a little bit more, or I can allow myself the experience of really living with these emotions. So
so
that
you're.
was an exercise that I went, that was a full on exercise that I went through. Yes.
It sounds like your new, as we've already discovered, your new why is more so understanding yourself. Your why you do what you do seems to be, and everything seems to be an experiment as to how do I respond when I do this, when I'm in this, when I have this. So that brings me on to another thing I wanted to talk about today. What impact has this magic with a K, this spirituality, all of these things? And actually, coming back to what I said at the top of this, I know that after our call, our last session, you went for a tarot reading.
Yes.
Um, so, what extent does that have on your life? What impact does that have?
Yeah.
And
So,
how did you get into this? Because this is a world I've no idea as to how it
how
works.
okay, so here's how I'll tell you the story of how I got into this. Uh yeah, so there's going to be the story of how I got into it, and then I think there's also going to be it's a conversation about faith more than anything else. So it's actually they're intertwined, right? The two things are very much intertwined. So I grew up in a very, very strong Christian tradition, right? My mom friggin' loves the church. She loves herself some Jesus. And I was in schools where I went to really conservative Christian schools growing up, a Lutheran school up until I went to public school for high school. And it was never anything that actually fit me, right? My mom, like I see my mom, I feel like my mom is wired to be a Christian. And I am like the absolute opposite. So I was like, me personally, I think I'm allergic. So but nonetheless, growing up in the household that I grew up in, growing up in kind of the culture that I grew up in, there was zero room to talk about I don't vibe with this. I don't agree with this. I remember growing up like at 10 years old fighting with my mom about I don't want to go to church. So um when I so growing up, I think there was this piece of, all right, trying to fight this battle of being very honest about what I believe and what I see as true. And like it's not worth it because I just don't feel like fighting with my mom all the time. And I was also in an environment where there wasn't really anybody else who was like me in that belief set. So I probably just swallowed like like whatever it was that I was like whatever it was that I really believed, and I go, fine, like I have to do this thing. I have to believe in God. I have to be a Christian. I have to read the Bible, and like this is how I'm going to find salvation. Like that's going to be my one way of doing things. When I had my breakdown, I think I had this experience that was like unlike anything. Well, one, it was unlike anything I'd ever experienced, but it came with it this really interesting experience of feeling connected to pretty much anything and everything. I felt like I was being guided by something. I felt like I wasn't alone in the whole thing. Like I knew that something was wrong, but I also kind of had this reminder of like it will stop, right? Like just do this, like just work through whatever you need to work through right now and know that it will stop. And so the experience that I had, like that kind of experience was like, wait a minute, no one's talking about this in church. No one, like I'm not seeing this in the Bible, right? Like when I'm praying, I don't feel that connection. So maybe this belief set that I grew up with is not the belief set that's actually going to get me to that point that my mom's getting. Like my mom's like, oh, I feel so connected. I don't worry. I have no concerns, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, I don't get that in the same way that you do, but that doesn't mean that I can't get that. So when I came out of my breakdown, or I came out of that time, funny enough, my mom was actually, I was living in Portland, Oregon, and my mom was there as well. And so she went to go get a massage at this one place down the street from where I lived. And so when she came back to my apartment, she's like, "Oh, Gabrielle, you should go check out this place." I'd walked past this store 1,000 times and never actually walked inside. So I went in, and I did not, I don't think I even got a massage, right? I think this guy, I think he recognized like my energy or my aura, and he did this really I think he did Reiki like that. I didn't realize he was doing Reiki at the time, but he started like, I remember he just kind of had his hands he didn't touch me, but it was like hovering over my body, and like he was like breathing, and he would like blow on things, and I could feel this like release. Like it's like there was like this blockage that I had. I felt this release, and I was like, that's really interesting. Like what is this man doing? And then he just kept on talking about things in the terms of energies. And then he also gave me a few crystals and stones. So like it was like a lepidolite, and it was what, a black obsidian. I think there was like one more, an amethyst crystal as well. So I knew nothing about these things, but I had these stones. So I have that experience. I have the experience of what I'll just say, like completely losing the faith system that I grew up with, or completely abandoning it. And so when I moved to New York and I was getting really curious about things, curious about myself, and also wanting to heal from what had happened, um, and also going through the traditional methods of healing, such as getting like a therapist or a counselor, and recognizing, I was like, every time I talk about what happened, I feel like I'm crumbling. I was like, it's too close, it's too present, it's too real. And so I need to find a way to heal that doesn't require me to talk. So there's all these things that are happening kind of all at once, which is losing my like kind of like losing, abandoning my face, or becoming aware of, or holding on. It's not even losing the faith system. It's I abandoned what I knew to be true for myself for other people to fit in. I paid the price of just trying to fit in while abandoning myself. And so then I'm like reclaiming myself. And part of that was faith system. Then there's, or lack thereof, right, of the way that I knew it. Then there was this introduction of little tiny things, little seeds that got planted, such as the Reiki and the crystals. And there was also this way that I knew, this modality that I knew to go to heal, which was counseling and therapy, talking, that was no longer like actually getting me to where I wanted to be. So then I had to think about, all right, again, what kind of modalities of healing don't require any talking? And Reiki was one of them. So I went to a Reiki master, and he and I would chit chat, and he would talk about auras, and he would have his incense going. And I was like, oh, this is interesting. This is curious. And then I'm also in New York City. I'm not working. I want to explore the city. And the way I explored the city was through bookstores. So I would just jump from one bookstore to the next. And I end up in a metaphysical bookstore where they have Bibles next to the Quran, next to tarot cards. And I'm like, this was like, it's an explosion of life where everything can coexist, and they have crystals there as well. So I would end up going to that store, like that was kind of like my sanctuary, and I would talk to the people who worked there, and I would talk about the crystals, and I would talk about angel guides and things like that. And I was like, this is so interesting. So for me, I feel like I like that to me was like a toy store or the candy store, where I'm like, I can go in and I can find out all these different things. And there was different tools, right? I talk about the crystals, but also I talk about the tarot cards. So for me, as I'm thinking about, all right, who am I? What am I interested in? What do I need to become more aware of? I was also using these tarot cards to help me in with that conversation. So if each tarot card represents some kind of archetypal experience that everybody in humanity is going to experience, and I go, all right, I just had this experience, what do I need to know about it? And I draw a card. It's not giving me the answers, but it can give me some perspective as to how to look at the situation. So for me, I was like, oh wow, it's not just tarot cards for the sake of tarot cards, but it's a perspective that I can use to have a better and potentially more comprehensive, or a much more authentic and true interpretation of what my experience is, versus, this is no shade to anybody who does go to church, but I would go to church, and the experience that I would have is, this is how you live your life because so and so said so, the end. The tarot cards or the runes or the oracle or whatever else is like, hey, here's a few words. It's very poetic. Here are a few words. Use your intuition. Use that feminine, amorphous side of you, that creative side, the illogical side, to be able to come up with your own meaning. And I think that's the piece to me that I get back to, like the empowering side of things. I went all over the place.
That is a-okay. So with the magic side of things, it's almost like that has become the faith element of your life, but you're no longer believing in an external factor. It's helping you to believe in yourself.
Yeah, it's a the magic with a K. I mean, you could talk about, it's like esoteric, it's the occult, right? It's the pagan, whatever you want
Okay,
to.
so
Right?
when you're saying esoteric and occult and
Yeah,
pagan, I'm getting pentagram summoning demons. Like what is actually going on here? Because that's an image that Hollywood will have given us. What does it look
yeah,
like from your perspective? Because if you're summoning demons, great. Let me know. Please don't put the next one in the White House.
it's
But
all
like,
no. I think it's all interpretation, right? I think the way I go back to this, like good, it's like good, bad, negative, positive. What it helps me do is to come at it at an absolute, right? Like in math, for example, absolutes, if you put in a positive, it's still a positive. You put in a negative, it's still a positive, right? It is, period. I think that's what I get, is whatever is going on, just it is. It doesn't, I don't have to make a judgment
well,
about it. I don't have to like internalize it.
I'm more
And
so.
from
Oh,
that place, I feel like I have better choices. I have options. I have agency in it.
Well, I'm also wondering about the practical elements.
So
So,
when you're like the tarot cards, for example, like I think a lot of this is it's ritual more than anything else. So like I give the example of my mom. And like say again, we don't see eye to eye on the practices and on the rituals. Um, and like what she gets from her connection with God is what I would say, all right, I feel like I'm connected to everything.
different
So
rituals, same
like
results.
it's yeah, I was like, it's just a different how, right? But like I don't see when I perceive of God, like it doesn't well, number one, it doesn't resonate with me because I've had so many experiences in places where like, we talk about God so much, but these are also the kinds of places that were highly oppressive
Mm.
to me personally. So I was
Mm-hmm.
like, so I'm like, I'm not saying that it doesn't exist. I'm not saying that God doesn't exist. I'm not saying that people shouldn't believe in God. And the language of my faith system, right, or my belief system is it's not even really a system, it's chaos. But like the way that I feel most comfortable engaging with all that is around me is to go, I really do believe that there is something way, way bigger than me who is this is something my grandma told me. My grandma was like years ago, my grandma was like, Gabrielle, honestly, it doesn't matter what you believe in. It just matters that you believe in something way bigger than yourself. And that thing that's way bigger than yourself has your back, right? She's like, just whatever that is. So, if you read like reading The Alchemist and it's like, hey, the universe conspires for your favor, like that to me is something where I feel like I can use that phrase. It doesn't trigger any kind of religious persecution for anyone else. And it's more abstract, it's more universal, honestly. And so I think that that's the piece to me where you have these magic with a K. To me, it's ancient, right? So it's not just tarot cards and rune readings. It also might be me studying Greek mythology as well, or Egyptian mythology and those kind of practices. Or so for me, I'm like, these are like much in the same way that Christians would read the Bible and say, all right, this text has been around for forever. And I go, this is another ancient text that has so many lessons in it that anybody can benefit from. But we have to interpret it for our times. We can't just take it as law at the end or say that it's better than or worse than anything else. So for me, it's not to say like, oh, hey, like I only believe in magic with a K. And when I study it, it's like this is something, here's yet another ancient text. Here's yet another ancient practice that has resonated. Like it's what's the word that I want to use? It just transcends time, right? And that to me is really interesting, is like when you can have all these different practices, all these different kind of philosophies and belief systems and things like that, and you can kind of pick and choose and come up with your own thing.
See, this is really interesting. Because it's a world I would never would have been exposed to had we not had this conversation.
Mm.
Um, Religion, when used, I want to say this word correctly, um, can be a massive force for good for others. Like even taking. So I grew up in Ireland, taking the Catholic religion. A lot of problems in the church as a whole and in those institutions. However, nuns ran schools, nuns ran hospitals, and things like that. I'm not going to say that there were not issues with that. However, those were more so issues with the people rather than the institutions themselves. Oh, I'm going to get cancelled for that one. But one of the elements that I've kind of learned from that is a big element of that has been an emphasis on helping others.
Yeah.
So to what extent has this your newfound spirituality had on you being able to help others, particularly in your job as a leader? Because I
Yeah.
feel like on the empathy side
I
of
th-
things, it might help
yeah.
quite a bit.
Yeah, big time. So let me back it up. If I'm gonna say very simply, here's what I got that I didn't get when I was growing up in the more traditional belief sets, right? in the traditions, it was very rigid, very, very clear what you can and what you cannot do. And there are roles, especially for women. And I was like, I don't agree. And so for me, it's not to say that that place was good or bad. And for me, I was like, it wasn't, this is not this is not me being authentic and true and so I can sit around at church all day long. And this is actually an experience that I had where I was like, yo, these people are wired for this. They love this. And I'm very much aware that I don't. So I'm not experiencing what they're experiencing. I'm not seeing what they're seeing. Like I felt like a fish out of water. And so I'm trying to think about, like, I don't even know why that is, but what I do know, when I started to look at other methods of connecting, I'm just going to bring it down to connecting, right? And having community yeah, it's very much just belonging and feeling included, right? Like going into these places, feeling like I'm never going to measure up. I'm never going to be able to be myself. I know this is not the same, but I think about, right, it's like the analogy would be, like if a friend of mine or my cousin like coming out as gay, for example, right? It's like, all right, hey, like there are these norms, and then you have somebody who steps away from that, and it's like, okay, will people accept me? Will they not? But I know that I need to live in my own truth. So like, number one, I'm not going to get persecuted for choosing to not be in a religion. So like, that's a big old asterisk. I'm not making it the same. It's not this exact same, but like, that's the way that I kind of think about things of, all right, as soon as I said, I don't believe in God, then it's like, what's wrong with you? There's something wrong. So I think that for me, I was like, for me, it was very judgmental as well. Like I was like, I am not allowed to just be who I am. And me being who I am means that I'm all of a sudden a problem, or that I'm sick or whatever. I never experienced that when I was going out and building my own thing for myself. So I didn't have as many rules. I didn't have any roles, right? I got to create something that was I felt like I was creating something truly, and it was like by me, for me. And with this, I got to learn more about myself. I got to learn what it felt like to be included. I got to learn what it felt like to belong. I got to learn how to do that as well for myself. And so when I think about what that means for me in my role as a leader, is I can also recognize what it's like to not belong, right? To not be included, and how devastating that can feel, especially when I'm around people where I'm like, I thought they were going to love me. So now I can be a lot more curious, because I was curious with myself first. So I can be compassionate towards others because I was compassionate to myself first. So that the me, like, finding myself, I had all these tools in, like, Magic with the K, or the crystals, or the energies, or learning about chakras, and basically finding that, I'm gonna go on another tangent, but like finding all these different resources that I could tap into to help myself develop into like a better me, where better me looks like I can hold more space for myself. I can be more compassionate for myself. I can be
So
true, because I can do that for others as well.
this magic, the spirituality element of your life really feeds into your why, because it gives you all of these different tools, all of these different structures, all of these different templates to find out who you are and what you like.
So I have this, I pulled my strengths from Gallup, the Clifton Strengths thing, Strengths Finder. Nope.
Oh, your strengths.
Yes, all my
Oh,
strengths.
wow.
Yeah, so I pulled my report, and the things that like my number one strength is ideation. I'm fascinated by ideas. Just fascinated. There's the learner, which is my third top strength, which is the process of learning excites me. So like the fact that I can go, so like growing up in a Christian household, it was like a sin to go and learn these other things, right? It's like, no, focus on this one thing. So if I think about who I am as a person and the kinds of places or influences that were around me, these were not influences that really enabled me to leverage my strengths, which is probably why I didn't feel very good in those places. It didn't suit me, it didn't fit me. So again, I know what it's like, me personally, I know what it's like to be told to be a certain way, to live a certain way, to think a certain way, to be a certain way, and to hate myself for it all the way while everyone else loves this version of me that I hate. Ew. So I'm like, I'm not going to subject other people to that experience. I'm going to get curious about them. How do they see themselves? Like, so even with my reps, and I learned this from someone named I'm sure people know. I learned this from Kevin Dorsey. He's like, hey, ask your people, number one, like, do they want you to have high expectations of them, right? So you don't just come in and assume, number one. So like I've learned to just not assume that people are the way that I am or that they want to live in the way that I do. So I can come with a lot more curiosity. A really easy way to show this in a sales role is, hey, what kind of performer do you want to be? Do you want to be somebody who's like doing just enough to get by, kind of 80%? Do you want to land right at 100%? Right? Like, hey, listen, I just want to make my OTE and go home. This is a job. Leave me alone. Do you want to be like someone who's just over? Cool. Or do you want to be a high flyer? Do you want to be number one, breaking records? And I go, doesn't matter what you tell me. I will support you unless you tell me that you want to be under 100%. Right? So I was like, I'm going to push you on that one, but I was like, if you want to be just at 100, I say just, but if you want to land right at 100% and do your job, right, and just get better along the way and see what happens, I'm going to support you in that. There's no problem. I think we can come like, so that's, but if I'm always expecting for people to go, oh, so like my number 2 strength is achiever. I want to be the person who's breaking records. So, but if I were to show up in that way with each one of my people, I would probably I would just string them out. I would burn them out. So I have to go, okay, well, what does achievement look like in this role for me? Or success look like for me? How can I leverage my strength of achievement in my role is I I much more care about how are people feeling? How like do they feel confident and comfortable in the role? Because if they can do that, they can learn how to get better, right? Am I building really solid relationships? Am I connecting deeply with people? Do they trust me, right? If they do, all right, I feel really good, and they'll get to a level of achievement. Are we progressing along the way in measurable ways? If we're doing that, that to me is achievement, right? And I've also been able to make this work meaningful for myself. This is kind of gets to my why, which is I know what it's like to not feel accepted, to not feel like I belong, to feel as though I'm the outcast. And I never want to be the person who perpetuates that to other people. So I want to I want to completely just like that's part of my why, right? Is people feel confident and comfortable in their role. They feel as though I have their back, that I care for them, and that no matter what, I'm invested in them personally. Doesn't matter what they do, right? It's unconditional love in that regard. So I think a lot of that had to do first with I had to show myself that unconditional love. I had to learn how to give unconditional love to myself, and then once I filled up my cup, then I can pour into others.
That makes a lot of sense.
And so the faith system is what keeps my cup full. Now that I have that, right? It doesn't matter what's going on. Of course, it'd be great if everything was great and it was just full on abundance at all times, but that's not always how life goes. So I can always, that's even what led me to go do my rune tarot card reading was, wow, I had to take a moment and go, my cup is not full and I want to pour into my people. And I know that if I don't go and fill my cup, I won't be able to do what I need to do with my people. Okay. So let me go fill my cup up in the way that I know how to best. That's the most effective way of filling my cup. It's the cleanest way of filling my cup. And now I'm gonna come back refreshed and we're gonna get this work. So yes.
Well, that's actually a very interesting way of doing it. This is the element of you that allows you to be the best version or a version of the best version of you. Yep. And that it is one of the many tools that you'll use for that. Yep. We have talked about faith quite a bit today. There's a question that I wanted to ask you about.
Yeah.
And I feel I genuinely don't know what the answer to this might be, but
Okay.
everybody that will have listened to these episodes, I mean, episode 2 was probably about 2 hours long, so they're about 3.5 hours in at this stage to you and your life. At that, people should have a sense of you as somebody happy, curious, caring. I think kind will be one of the words. But what don't people know about you? So, what is something that you wish people knew that people don't know?
I
Did I ask you this in episode number 1?
I don't know.
I don't think so.
I
Okay,
I I
I'm gonna cut
don't
this bit.
think you did.
Okay, because
I'm
okay,
just thinking because I used to say I've answered other folks have asked me this question. Um and my answer has been that I'm really sensitive. Super sensitive. Um and here's like kind of the context of it. I've maybe did we I don't think we talked about this, but all right, I'm almost 6 feet tall. Yeah, very tall. I can be actually I think this is the piece. I think people think that I am like super extroverted, when I'm just extroverted when I need to be. I'm much more introspective, and I think that's where the sensitivity piece comes in. So I can definitely like when I need to be on, I'm on, and it takes a lot for me to charge up to be on in that way. So why this is important, why I even say this, why I think I wish people, why more folks knew that, especially people that I interact with quite a bit, is if someone goes, "Oh, here's Gabrielle. She's got a brand. She's got the success. She's sharing all these things, right?" And this is not just in my professional life. It's been my whole entire life. They go, "Oh, I can be tough on her." When I'm like, actually, that's probably the worst thing for me. I'm like, no, please. Like, because I'm already gonna beat myself up, right? I don't need somebody to come in, and because then I have to. Like, I'm much better at this now. Where in the past, if I already thought, oh wow, like I'm bad, and someone comes in, they're like, you fucking suck, and they think that that's what's going to wake me up, like that's their motivation tactic. Then I'm like, oh no, it's true, right? Like, versus, and so now, but like now it doesn't mean that I'm immune to, oh hey GB, you suck. It's more like, all right, that's a trigger for me, and so I find myself having to like spend a lot of time recalibrating. And I think about what that means, let's say for the workplace, for example. If it's this has happened in the past where, let's say, it's a boss who is just reaming on me, and I had and actually this was a basketball coach where he was reaming on me in a game, and I think he like saw that I just kind of had this glazed over deer in headlights look, and he goes, prove me wrong. I'm trying to motivate you. And I was like, wow, I would have never known. So, and I'm just sitting there like, oh my God, I suck. This is me terrible. Now I got to get on the court. Now I'm super in my head. So that can show up at the workplace as well. So when people try and come in with this super tough, quote unquote, tough love, for me, it's much more distracting for me personally versus if you went in and said, hey, listen, I want to get curious about what you're doing. Allow me the opportunity to be vulnerable as well. I'll listen, things like that. But yeah, if you just come in hot, super hot, most of the time, I'm like, I'm just gonna have to sit in child's pose for 30 minutes before I get back to work.
So, what I'm hearing is what you wish people knew about you is that you've got uh, you can be perceived as having a tough exterior,
Hmm.
whereas, so if people respond to that perceived tough exterior, they can have a very detrimental effect, not necessarily on you, but on the relationship between you.
Oh, big time. Yeah, because I'm like, I feel like you don't see me.
That makes sense.
Yeah,
And then, well, thank you for sharing that.
you're really
And
good
it's
at
interesting
this.
how it goes from being sensitive to not
Mhm.
necessarily being sensitive, but more so the external does not match the internal.
Yeah,
Um,
really. Yeah, big time.
but again, I would never have considered you as somebody, as a hard ass, as anything like that. However,
We've also talked a lot
we
about a
have talked
lot.
a lot. We have talked
We,
about a lot.
yeah,
Um,
we've gone on 50 first dates now. Okay.
over the course of these time, yeah.
Oh
Um,
yeah, yeah.
um,
Yeah,
but
I'm like 2 steps away from meeting your family right now. We
all
know each
right.
other.
Well, then the last. Okay. Well, then my last first date question for you, will be because this is actually, you know what? If anybody is listening to this and wants to steal this for a first date, what is your most controversial opinion? The one where you're like, oh, I don't know if I should share this. Yeah. What is your most controversial opinion?
So yeah, my most controversial opinion is that Chicago has the best food scene in the US, and you
Uh,
cannot tell me otherwise. You
you see,
can't.
Gabrielle, what am I going to do with that? You see, like, I'm from Ireland. I'm living in the UK. I've visited New York once. That's going to be very controversial to a massive population of people who will not listen to this podcast. Uh, but your controversial opinion is that Chicago is the best place in the world for food.
Yeah, Chicago.
Okay,
Yeah, Chicago's dope. All
I'm going to
right.
believe you.
All right. I don't know that I have a super controversial opinion. I, you know what? Here's what I think. Here's what I think, and I don't think it's necessarily controversial. And maybe that's why. So I've been reading a lot about servant leadership. I've been talking about this development. I have told you about my development binder that I've been creating for the past week or so. And a lot of it is based off of strengths. I talked about this with my face system. What it's not, again, I don't think it's controversial. I just think it's very matter of fact, which is if you want the best out of people, look at what they already possess that's the best, rather than trying to harp on these weaknesses and make them feel like crud. So yeah, that's my piece, which is, hey, if you're a person who's in a leadership position, manager, frontline, whatever else it is, and you're trying to figure out, oh man, why don't my people do X, Y, and Z? I would honestly look yourself in the mirror and go, do I actually know what my people's why is? Do I know what their strengths are? Do I know what they actually value? And if you don't know the answers and don't guess, if you've never asked your people that question, never take the time or the attention to do so, then I think that's probably why you haven't figured out how to get your people to align to the things that you want to do, right?
You
And I
know,
think, yeah, that's my piece.
I think it makes sense to me that after all of our conversations, that your most controversial opinion is that if you're a bad leader, stop being a bad leader and actually just ask people what they care
Yeah.
about.
Well, there's a lot of
Um,
bad
there
leaders.
are,
There
do you
are
know
a
what?
lot of bad leaders.
I think it's one of those things whereby it's 99% make the 1% look bad. It's kind of that's one of the ways that unfortunately it ends up working
No,
out.
I don't think listen, I don't think everyone is bad. And yeah, I was in this clubhouse room a couple weeks back and someone had said, hey, listen, I've got an opinion for you and you're not going to like it. And he goes, all sales managers suck. And I swear I melted. I melted. I fell straight through the floor. I was like, no, we're not. So, but if you take a moment, like I think even I'm an SDR manager. I was coaching up SDRs at other organizations through this one company that I was involved with, and the only thing that people would tell these SDRs to do was to make more calls. I tried that approach with my people and they damn near revolted. I was about to be Marie Antoinette.
Which makes sense. Which makes
Yeah.
sense because that
So
is actually awful sales leadership advice.
it's
Uh,
not, yeah. So I think there's this piece of curiosity is underrated in leadership, right? There's this expectation we're supposed to have all the answers. I'm like, no, we're not. We're people.
no.
We're people.
Gabrielle, we've talked an awful lot over the last little while. We've talked about your life now, where it has been, where it's gone to. We've talked about your relationships with your family. We've talked about your relationship with yourself. We've talked about how some have gone up, some have gone down. We've talked about your relationship with partners, one in particular, but more so the effect that it's had on you rather than the relationship itself, which I think is quite interesting. We've talked about your faith, lack thereof, and then refinding and the impact that it's had on you and the similarities between that and everything else. And we've talked about your rituals, your hobbies. The main thing that I'm getting out of this is sort of a rebirth style era of your life, whereby you were in a space that was not that was fine and you could have stayed in for a very long time, but you wouldn't have experienced the experiences you're having now. You wouldn't have experienced the joy, the self-awareness. You talk about operating on higher frequencies. And now that you're paying attention to it, and now that you're actively making it a priority, that has been the thing that's made a massive impact on your life. My very last question for you: is there anything we haven't talked about yet? Anything that people really need to hear from you?
Man, should have brought my tarot cards with me. I'm drawing a card.
I love, I love, I love how that's your response.
I was like, I would have pulled a card of like, here's what to know. I don't think it's not about what you need to know about me specifically. I hope that after assuming that you've listened to all of this, I hope the things that stick out or that resonate are you always have a choice, no matter what. I think this sounds kind of corny, but like you're so much more powerful than maybe you think you are, or you give yourself the ability to be. And I don't know, this is the big message. This is what I tell myself a lot. And even, kind of going back to the breakdown, what I remember, there was this moment where I allowed myself to break. I made a very conscious decision. I can recall it I was like, all right, there's a lot going on, and I just have to I have to be okay with letting myself go through the experience of having a lot going on. And what I told myself right before I kind of allowed myself that experience was, it will stop. So like, no matter what's happening, and I think especially during the hard times, to kind of take that moment and go, it will stop at some point in time. And so I would just say, give yourself permission to experience whatever it is that you're experiencing, and recognizing that at one point in time, it will stop. You always have a choice for it to get better. And I think there's also this other piece of, and there's also so many people who are always going to be rooting for you. So yeah, those are my last three pieces.
On that note, thank you very much for joining me and for joining us. If people want to hear more about you, where would you like people to go and try and find you if they would like to continue trying to find you?
Yes. So the only real way to find me is on LinkedIn. So feel free to find me, Gabrielle, GB, Blackwell on LinkedIn.
Fantastic. Look, thank you very much for joining me. I knew, so when I was doing my research for this, when I came across your story, the way you talked, I knew there was a story worth telling. And I'm really glad that we got to tell it. Looking forward to catching up with you in 4 years' time when you've got a much different life story and a much different why than what's going on now.
Oh my gosh, have me on the podcast again. This was fun.
Right. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for joining us. And I'll catch up with you again soon.
All right. Thanks, Brian.
And there we have it. The life of Gabrielle Blackwell. I didn't know what I was getting myself into when I first had my first conversation with Gabrielle Blackwell. Over the last 3 sessions, we talked about everything from spirituality, her childhood, trauma, depression, mental breakdown, rebuilding a life, racism, sexism, and hardship. And I still interviewed a very happy person. And I think that is a testament to Gabrielle herself, but it's a pattern that I've seen over this entire season. It seems that the people that I've interviewed that have had the most hardship are the happiest. They're the ones that have gone through the most and have had to actively decide that happiness is a choice. Gabrielle is a shining light of that. She is a true embodiment of the idea that you are a master of your own destiny. And I hate to use words like that, but she pulls them out of me. So, we will deep dive more into the learnings and the reflections on this season next week when I release my solo episode where I can talk to you about my reflections from season 1, what went right, what didn't, and what you can expect from season 2. Until then, let me know if there's anything that I can do for you, and I will chat with you next week. I really hope that after these seasons, after these episodes, you have a better understanding of why you do what you do.